Hello again. Our next 3 videos here in Module 2 are all about group development, all the stuff related to how groups come together and form their distinct character. And this is important because what a group does and what it accomplishes are directly related to what or even who that group is. High-performing groups and teams seem to develop a distinct personality, a collective sense of identity that transcends the individual members. Conversely, low-performing groups or teams never really seem to come together, despite what might be listed formally on paper or an organizational chart. They never are more than just the sum of their parts. So let's look at the things involved in groups and teams coming together to form their distinct character or identity. We're going to focus on 3 key concepts: socialization, norms, and roles. First, socialization simply refers to the process of becoming part of a group. And although the concept of socialization may be straightforward, the actual practice of socialization can be very complex. Becoming part of a group often requires you to navigate some pretty difficult and nuanced social terrain, figuring out how everyone in the group is connected and how you fit in. And of course, all this happens through communication, how we interact with each other as the group develops. Now, certainly many groups are formed by mere assignment, like when your boss informs you that you're going to be part of a certain project team. But we're not talking about mere assignment here. We're talking about truly becoming part of the group in a social sense, thus socialization. Surely you've had the experience of technically being part of a group, yet not really belonging to the group. You're sort of on the outside socially, even if on paper you're formally part of the group. So the key is for groups to interact with each other so that everyone is socialized into the group and the group develops a distinct character or identity that transcends the mere sum of its parts. We can't just assume that since people have merely been assigned to the group, that they will automatically become part of the group. That requires further levels of interaction. And much of that interaction may be beyond what we might consider to be the normal work of the group. Things like informal conversations before and after meetings, off-site get-togethers for meals and drinks, or time spent getting to know each other, talking about personal interests and experiences. And the mistake people often make is thinking that this sort of stuff doesn't really count as real group work because you're not directly focused on the task at hand, solving the problem, making a decision. All this stuff is critical, because the quality of that decision you make or your ability to solve that problem is directly related to the social dynamics in your group. If people haven't been fully socialized into the group, it can have all sorts of negative ramifications. People won't trust each other. They won't be willing to engage each other in constructive conflict. They won't be accountable to the rest of the group. They won't care as much about the outcomes of the group or the group's overall success. Of course, you can't just sit around and talk about personal stuff and pop culture all the time. You do need to get your work done. But the quality of that work depends on the character or the identity of your group. So it's critical that you take the time, especially early in the life of your group, to make sure that everyone is socialized, that they really become part of the group. And socialization isn't just a one-time thing, something you achieve once at the beginning of your group and then don't have to worry about again. Yes, much of our socialization happens when groups initially form, but there are also key moments of socialization throughout the life of the group. Those interactions outside of meetings where you get to know group members a little bit better. Those times where you acknowledge recent accomplishments of group members before the meeting gets started, or take time to celebrate your latest group achievement. When new people join the group or previous members leave. Anything you can do to personalize your group more so that you can bond and have a more cohesive unit, not just a collection of individuals. And as you might guess, this is especially important for groups that are physically dispersed and often meet online rather than in person. Socialization is a very human process that often works better when you're in close proximity with other people. Finally, it's important to remember that socialization never happens in a vacuum. Groups and teams almost never form from scratch with no previous context. Instead, groups usually have a history that influences the socialization process. Members have previous interactions with each other. Things are known about each other, about other people and how they performed on other projects in the past. Or people are associated with other groups or events whose reputation precedes them. This means we all come to the table with some baggage. People assume they know who we are, what our motivations are, and how we will work. That's just inevitable. So the key for us is to work past some of the history as we form our expectations for our groups, to give others the benefit of the doubt as they socialize into our group, and to acknowledge the reservations or uncertainties that others have about our history and what we bring to the group, and thus to communicate in ways that help overcome some of these negative perceptions. Sometimes the burden is on us to work harder to fit into the group. Other times the burden is on the broader group to create the conditions that enable individuals to fit in better. Whatever the case, it is critical that we pay attention to the socialization processes of our groups so we can develop the character or identity necessary to be more successful. A second key concept of group development is the notion of group norms. As we socialize into a group with a distinct character or identity, we will inevitably develop various standards, customs, and expectations that are unique to our group and how we operate. These are called norms, things that become normal for our group. Norms are sort of like rules, but a little more informal, though sometimes more powerful. Norms are things that are generally understood by everyone in the group, even if not recorded in a formal policy or even talked about very often. Some norms are pretty simple and harmless, like normally starting a meeting with personal updates from your weekend activities or going out for lunch to celebrate a group member's birthday. But other norms are much more significant and greatly affect group performance, both positively or negatively. Like a norm that we always seek an outside opinion before making a final decision, or that no one challenges the boss and his or her ideas. A norm that people generally don't respond to work emails on evenings or weekends, or that people are expected to be available anytime during the week. These sorts of norms can help our groups be more successful, or they can be the source of much dysfunctionality. So it's very important that we pay attention to the norms that are developing in our groups. That way we can foster norms that are helping our groups be more successful, like norms of good decision-making practices, and challenge norms that drag our groups down or bring out our worst, like starting meetings late or not taking it seriously when group members don't perform their tasks. When things like this become normal in our groups, we need to intervene and develop new norms. And the good news is that we can develop better norms because norms are a function of our group communication, how we interact with each other. They're not inevitable or determined. Of course, it can be difficult to overcome entrenched norms, but if we change our patterns of interaction, we can change what is normal in our groups. And I hope you can see the reciprocal relationship between group norms and group communication. Group norms develop from our communication with each other, and those norms then influence our subsequent group interactions. So for example, if we continually remain silent when a group member voices a bad idea, rather than engaging in constructive critique, then a norm develops that will make it increasingly difficult to practice constructive critique in the future. But we can intervene and communicate differently, starting a more virtuous cycle that leads to better group norms that enhance the overall functionality and success of our groups. So norms are a key aspect of group development related to group communication. Lastly, let's talk about roles, our final concept of group development. Roles are the various positions that people have in a group. Roles involve formal divisions of labor and responsibility, like if you're a project manager, the financial administrator, or bring some particular expertise to the group that is needed for your group to accomplish its work. But roles also involve more informal expectations about people's place in the group. And when we talk about group members, we often refer to these sorts of roles. We don't always just identify people by name. We often say things like, she's the blank of the group, the leader, the problem solver, the numbers person, the negotiator. But these sorts of informal roles can also be quite negative, like being the late person or the slacker or the cynic. Why is this important for group communication? Well, because our roles develop from our interactions with other group members. They are created or reinforced or changed through our ongoing communication. But our roles also influence how we communicate with each other in our groups. There are certain pressures and expectations to communicate in certain ways based on your role and the role of the person you're interacting with. So roles are an essential part of a group's overall character or identity, and thus a key aspect of group development. Now, conceptually, this is pretty basic stuff, but in practice, roles are very important and something many people mess up or simply take for granted. We need to have a clear understanding of who is responsible for what, and also need a keen awareness of who fills what position in your groups and the expectations, both formal and informal, that go along with these roles. Doesn't mean roles can't change, but it will require some savvy negotiating and maneuvering. And sometimes that's necessary. So, if you need to make changes, it will help if you have a better understanding of how group roles and group communication relate to each other. So that concludes our overview of group development and the important concepts of socialization, norms, and roles. In our next two videos, we'll dig a bit deeper and explore the different models of group development to learn about how group development actually happens. We'll begin with phase models of group development, followed by multiple sequence models. All of this will enhance our understanding of how groups come together, or not, and develop into cohesive units that transcend the mere sum of their parts. See you next time.